So thank you for joining us. And Ken Burns is not with us today. So the infamous Jon Reiskind, the wonderful, the magical,
Well,
take it away.
I don't have to say too much for myself, but I used to hide the fact that I was born and bred in Staten Island. But since we had the recent Amazon Union vote in Staten Island, I feel a little kinder towards my home island. But I taught at the University of Florida for 36 years, and I retired 19 years ago. You can figure out all of that. Welcome again. This is the last of the 6 talks on the Nobel Prizes of 2021. And today I'm going to talk about the Peace Prize. I'm going to try to, just for about 15, 20 minutes, talk a little background, and then we're going to be deal with this year's laureates, 2 of whom, there were 2, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It says the Nobel Peace Prize, a short history, and the 2021 laureates. This medal that you see here is actually the medal for the non-peace prizes, except for economics and peace. This is for the other 4, but we'll move on and talk a little bit about something that Pradeep actually touched on and several others touched on. I'll just quickly go through Alfred Nobel and note that he had lots of patents, including one for dynamite. I never knew the reason, but last week we learned that dynamite is nitroglycerin mixed with clay. So that's something I know. He was an amazing chemist, but he was also a great engineer. He was a pacifist, and that's an interesting observation because it may relate to the Peace Prize this week. True enough, he read his own obit and got freaked out by it, and then decided in his will to give 31 million Swedish krona, today about $310 million, to fund the prizes in a foundation. The foundation is still viable. In his will, he specifically pointed out, and it was made a few years before he died, luckily, specified that his fortune be used to create a series of prizes, including peace. And he died on the 10th of December, 1896, just a year after his will was drawn up. And that's the date when the awards are given each year. Most of them in Stockholm, you'll see one in Oslo. All the peace, but the Peace Prize is determined by committees of Swedish institutions. And the Peace Prize is awarded by a Norwegian committee, oddly enough. The will finally approved in 1897, and the foundation established, was established in 1900. Most of it from oil assets in, at the time, part of the Russian Empire, but today is a separate country, Azerbaijan. And the present assets, $470 million. So they've come out ahead. I want to talk just a little general things about the total Nobel Prizes. They've been given for 120 years now. And 609 times they were awarded. You know, we added the economics one in 1969. And with a few people won more than one Nobel Prize. I think that was outlined by one of our speakers earlier. Ultimately, 943 individuals are or were Nobel laureates, plus 25 organizations, and that's going to be important. This year, the prize is worth 10 million Swedish krona, and I asked my smartphone, what's that worth? And it's worth $1 million roughly in 2021. Some of the limitations have been referred to before. You can not give more than 3 individuals the Nobel Prize in 1 year, and you can't apply it to more than 2 different works for each Nobel Prize. Organizations can be chosen only may be chosen for the Peace Prize. All the individual laureates must be living at the time of the award announcement, and that will prove to be an interesting point we'll bring up again. We've seen this or talked about it before. The selection process is a year-long process, a little more than a year long, because there's an invitation to nominate individuals, or in the case of the Peace Prize, organizations for the Nobel Prize. Not everybody can just send in a note saying, I nominate my father-in-law or whatever. You have to have certain status. Each one applies to each of those prizes. And we'll get to the Nobel Peace Prize in a minute. The decisions cannot be appealed. And sometimes that leads to some embarrassments. It was mentioned in one video last week. And the nominations themselves and from whom they came sealed for 50 years to avoid an embarrassment or just misunderstanding. December 10th, they're awarded in 2 different cities, most in Stockholm. So we'll just go through that in a minute. And let's talk about the medal itself. Medal itself before 1980 was made out of 23 karat gold, but since 1980, it's 18 karat gold plated with 24 karat gold. 2 German laureates, I think in the chemistry, were afraid that their medals would be taken. They sent their medals to Copenhagen for safekeeping. But then Germany invaded Denmark, and a chemist dissolved the gold in aqua regia, which is a mixture of acids that actually can dissolve. It means royal water can dissolve gold. And then they recovered the gold and recast the medals, one of those little factoids that is so fascinating to me. So let's get to the Nobel Peace Prize itself. In the will, and this applies to all the prizes actually, but it said the Peace Prize shall be awarded to the person who in the preceding year shall have done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, because he was a pacifist, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. So this is an interesting, pretty narrow definition. And as was mentioned last week by one of the commentators, this idea of limiting it to the work done in the preceding year has been loosened by all the prizes. And oftentimes they can recognize work done decades and decades ago, or significant work that has survived the test of time. The Nobel Peace Prize is oftentimes a little more timely than some of the prizes, but is awarded by the Norwegian Nobel Committee. And this is 5 persons who are chosen by the Norwegian Storting, which is the Parliament of Norway. What's interesting is that it's often former legislators who are part of this committee in Norway. And the question people have asked, why did Nobel choose Norway and not Sweden for this prize? And Nobel, as it says here, may have considered Norway better suited to awarding the prize as it did not have the same militaristic traditions as Sweden. Those of us who grew up in the mid-20th century recognize Sweden as a neutral country during World War II. Whether that was moral or ethical or not, we can debate some other time. We never thought of Sweden as a military country, but in the 18th and 19th century, especially the 18th century, it was a very, very powerful military country. Also, at the end of the 19th century, the Norwegian parliament had had been involved, it's not English, with efforts to resolve conflicts through mediation and arbitration. Interesting enough is Norway was ruled in union with Sweden until it declared its independence only in 1905 from Sweden. I grew up in a Norwegian neighborhood, and there were lots of Swedish jokes. The Swedes were made fun of, even though possibly because Sweden dominated Norway. The mother of the present Norwegian king was a daughter of the King of Sweden. So there's a lot of that going on too. They're very close to one another now. I wanted to just mention the Peace Prize. Back in 2015, they did a popularity contest. And incidentally, that's the medal of the Peace Prize. And I forgot to add the reverse of it. The reverse of it shows two men shaking hands, which is a very nice thing. Anyway, in 2015, the most popular Peace Prize laureates, and Mother Teresa was number 3. Malala Yousafzai, 17-year-old teenager who won in 2014, the previous year to the poll, was the second most popular. The most popular was Martin Luther King Jr. in 1964, who was recognized for his nonviolent and peaceful approach to these situations. That's just another factoid. The only Nobel Prize that can be won by an organization is the Nobel Peace Prize. 25 organizations have won over the years, and I'll show you a list of some of them in a little while, but the Red Cross won in 3 times. Notice each one represented a wartime award, which is uncommon. Many awards were not given during World War I and World War II. That applies to the Peace Prize as well. And the UN High Commissioner for Refugees twice. And in many ways, that High Commissioner organization is doing yeoman's work this year, as you know. 4 American presidents have won. Theodore Roosevelt for settling the Japanese-Russian War through a conference. Woodrow Wilson for his the Versailles Conference and basically ending World War I with unknown consequences leading to World War II. Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, we'll talk about him in a moment, and one vice president, Al Gore, for climate change initiation. There are a bunch of controversies in the Nobel Peace Prize. Among them is that they are politically motivated. In fact, what isn't, but anyway, and premature and guided by a faulty definition of what constitutes work for peace. There's several embarrassments. Obama was not an embarrassment, but it was aspirational rather than accomplishment. And a few years ago, the present president of Ethiopia was awarded for settling the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. But he has turned out over the last couple of years to be, many could consider him not worthy of that award for the civil war that's going on in Ethiopia to this day. Also, certain people have been omitted. I think the ones in this list, these are some of the major ones. Eleanor Roosevelt was so critical in establishing the World Treaty on Human Rights in the 1940s. But Mahatma Gandhi should have been. He was nominated a whole bunch of years, and finally, he was nominated a few days before his assassination, and not being living, he couldn't. And in 1948, they then decided not to give any peace prize, saying no worthy person. That was a kind of a gesture to recognize his contribution and his assassination. I just wanted to show you briefly a list of winning institutions since the 1960s, and some of them you recognize and some are pretty obscure. Even recently, the organization, where is it? Oh, International Campaign to Ban Landmines. That was something that Princess Diana was involved with. Even more recently, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons in 2017. But last year, or in 2020, the World Food Program, which the World Food Program and UNICEF are major players in offering help to the Ukrainians during this present war. So an interesting long list to look at. And they all make sense. Some are considered especially political, like the European Union, which Norway is part of. So anyway, okay. So I wanted to just mention very briefly that the Nobel Prize ceremonies in Stockholm are an event that is extraordinarily fancy and ceremonial. All but the Peace Prize are awarded in a ceremony in Stockholm, which ends a week of celebration on December 10th. Nobel Week leads up to the ceremony, includes the lectures of all the recipients, and prizes are awarded in two halls in Stockholm, the prize in the concert hall and the banquet. And the King of Sweden presents each Nobel laureate with her medal and diploma. So here are just a couple of pictures of them. This is this year. This King Carl XVI Gustav and his wife, and his oldest child, who by new rules of the trade, they are not distinguishing the next monarch by just restricting it to men. So she is the crown princess, even though she has a brother, crown princess of Sweden. That's another footnote. Here's the king of Sweden, his queen, everybody fancy, white tie. It's quite a thing. And that evening, they have a dinner for 1,400 people in the City Hall of Stockholm. Very fancy. However, the Peace Prize in Oslo is much tamer. Here's the king, queen, and crown prince of Norway. They're not, he wears a business suit. They're somber and serious people. It's given in the City Hall there. Here they're spaced out because of the pandemic. And we will see some of that. So finally, I want to get to the Peace Laureates, because that's really the important people in this whole process. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Peace Prize to Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. Those are the words of the award. Maria, and you can read the rest. What I want to do now is to go through some excellent summaries of the importance of these two, as well as in their own words, as I did last week. So we have here the phone call telling her that she's won the Nobel Prize. In this case, this was actually her first she hadn't an idea that she was awarded it. So let's listen to that.
Hello?
Wait a minute.
Am I talking to Maria Ressa?
You are, yeah. Yes, I'm Olav Njølstad calling from the Norwegian Nobel Institute in Oslo, and I'm calling you on behalf of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. And it's a great pleasure for me, Maria, to inform you that at 11 o'clock local time here in Oslo, it will be announced that you are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021 for your courageous fight for freedom of expression in the Philippines. And you will be sharing the prize with another candidate, which I cannot disclose the name of right now because I will need to call that person first. So
Oh my gosh.
I will only congratulate you on behalf of the committee, and we will come back to you later with more information. But I would be delighted to hear your immediate spontaneous reaction to this news.
I'm speechless. I'm actually live on another event, but my God, oh my gosh, this is, I'm speechless. Thank you so very much.
I'm glad to hear. And please, Maria, you must not tell others about this until 11 o'clock when the news is officially broken from here. Is that fine?
Yes, until 11 o'clock.
Until 11 o'clock. Great. Okay, I have to say goodbye now and make the other call. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I just like the spontaneity of it. On December 10th, when the awards are given, they receive a diploma, which you see here being held to the right. On the left is a piece of original artwork that is presented, and for each Nobel laureate, both for the Peace Prize, but for all the other Nobel laureates as well. And this one in Oslo, and the next, and the others in Stockholm. So what I'd like to do is to go through a series of both news reports and interviews that will try to build a kind of a three-dimensional picture of who these people are and what they've done. I will point out that they were chosen as representative of journalists in general. And you'll see that'll come out, but each one has their own story. What I'm going to show you now is an announcement of the prize on Deutsche Welle News, which we get on WUFT TV at 6 p.m. Every weekday. It means German wind, and this was on the day of the choice with a good summary of the significance of both winters. I will also notice you'll hear about Anna Potlakovskaya, a reporter for the Novaya Gazeta, which is Muratov's newspaper, and she was assassinated on the 7th of October in 2006, which is ironically one day before at the anniversary.
The winners of the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize have just been announced in Oslo. The award was given to two journalists, Maria Ressa from the Philippines and Dmitry Muratov from Russia. The Nobel Committee cited their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression in their respective countries. Ressa founded the investigative journalism website Rappler and has focused much of her work on Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's controversial and violent war on drugs. Muratov was one of the founders of Russia's independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, which has a fundamentally critical attitude towards power, the committee said, and has been its editor-in-chief since 1995.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021 to Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. Ms. Ressa and Mr. Muratov are receiving the Peace Prize for their courageous fight for freedom of expression in the Philippines and in Russia.
Speaking by telephone right after the announcement, Maria Ressa said she was in shock and explained what impact the prize will have on her and her team.
It means we keep doing what we do, right? This is added energy, added focus. I mean, the biggest problem that we have is that so much happens in darkness. And I think what we've always tried to do is to continue doing journalism, accountability journalism, investigations that will hold power to account. It's just become far more difficult with the advent of technology and social media, and the way social media has allowed budding authoritarians and dictators to exploit their algorithms and take power and crumble democracies from within. So, I mean, thank you so much for recognizing what effort it takes to do the job of a journalist today.
Well, for more, I'm joined in the studio by DW's political correspondent, Simon Young. Simon, thanks for coming in. Firstly, let's start with, tell us a little bit more about Maria Ressa and who she is, and Rappler in particular.
Yeah, the Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, she's really been a leader of media scrutiny of President Duterte in particular and his regime. She's been in a sort of a battle with him, really. Maria Ressa criticizes President Duterte as an authoritarian who's undermined democracy in that country, and she says that the country's become a dictatorship disguised as a democracy. So she's been pursuing his career since before he became president back in 2015. She interviewed Duterte, and it was in that interview, for instance, that he revealed that he personally had killed 3 people, and that's been one of the hallmarks of his campaign against drugs in the Philippines, which she says has gone way too far and, as I say, is undermining democracy. Her platform, this online magazine Rappler, is a special media product because it's run by women, and it's been repeatedly in conflict with the Duterte regime. There's been more than a dozen prosecutions against Rappler and its journalists since 2017, and Maria Ressa herself has been prosecuted over a text that appeared on that online site, was an expose of corruption by a senior judge in the Philippines. So it just shows you across a whole range of levels and different stories. And for many years, Maria Ressa has been sort of leading the fight to bring the leaders of her country to account.
All right, in a moment, we're going to cross to Russia and speak further on Dmitry Muratov, so I won't ask you about him right now, but what message do you think the Nobel Academy are trying to send with these awards that they've handed out today? Well, as was said in the citation, what they are intending to do is to underscore the basic human rights, in particular, the freedom of expression and the freedom of the media. And they say that their logic is that those freedoms are essential to preserving and promoting international peace, dialogue between nations and within nations, of course, to bring stability. And so they hope that by putting the spotlight on these 2 leading opponents, it has to be said, media representatives who stand up to authoritarian regimes in the Philippines and in Russia, they hope to bolster not just the media in those countries, but I think in other places around the world where conditions are difficult for journalists. Indeed. All right, Simon Young, thank you very much. And we can speak now to Emily Sherwin. She's our correspondent in Moscow. Emily, thanks for joining us. Tell us a bit more about the newspaper Novaya Gazeta and its editor-in-chief and Nobel Peace Prize winner Dmitry Muratov.
Well, Dmitry Muratov is one of the founding members of Novaya Gazeta, and he's actually been its editor-in-chief as well for over 20 years. And I think an important figure in standing up to the government here or rather criticizing it through journalism and also standing up for freedom of speech here in Russia. Now, Novaya Gazeta itself is somewhat of an institution in the country. It's a newspaper that comes out 3 times a week, and they're really known for their investigative journalism, including particularly into human rights issues and also corruption. For example, it was one of the newspapers, one of the media outlets that revealed the presence of Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine during the war there, and also the newspaper that revealed the fact that gay people in Chechnya, in the Russian region of Chechnya, were being tortured for their sexuality. Muratov and the other journalists at Novaya Gazeta have been really uncompromising over the years in upholding their values and continuing their investigative work despite the increasing difficulties. They've received a lot of threats over the years. One journalist that I spoke to in my reporting there about the newspaper told me that it sometimes feels like they're working in a war zone or, you know, walking over a minefield, because actually 6 of the journalists from that newspaper have been killed over the years for their work, including the well-known investigative journalist Anna Politkovskaya. Actually, it was the 15th anniversary of her murder yesterday, and we went to speak to some of her colleagues at the newspaper. Let's take a look at our report. Journalist Yelena Kostyuchenko is having a first look at what used to be the office of Anna Politkovskaya, her colleague, shown here in archive footage. Now it's a museum in her honor. Kostyuchenko says Politkovskaya's in-depth reporting about the wars in Chechnya was the reason she came to work at the paper Novaya Gazeta as an intern. At the time, Anna Politkovskaya was still alive. She wrote about topics that no one else wrote about because they were too scared, and she wrote in a way that meant it was impossible to remain indifferent. Her words hit you right in your soul, and they stayed there. Kostyuchenko is an investigative journalist herself. She often writes about controversial social and political topics like LGBTQ rights and the presence of Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine. She says Politkovskaya is her role model even now. I constantly keep her in my head as an example while I'm writing, all the time. Of course, I can hardly hope that I'll grow to her level. That's impossible. But it's as if she lights my way. Novaya Gazeta is one of the few remaining critical media outlets in Russia. Over the years, 6 of the newspaper's journalists were killed for their work, including Anna Politkovskaya. Many in the team still remember her huge dedication. Once she came into the canteen while we were having lunch and started saying the Chechens are torturing people, and everyone just said, "Wait a minute, let's have some lunch first." She was always thinking about her work. There were always lines of people outside her office, people who had come from the Caucasus, from Chechnya, to ask for her help. We can't ever betray our journalistic standards, because that would also mean betraying the people who gave their life for honest journalism. We here continue their work. Anna Politkovskaya was renowned for her reporting about Russia's wars in Chechnya and her fierce criticism of the Kremlin's policies. On October 7th, 2006, she was shot 4 times at her Moscow apartment. Those who carried out the killing were later sentenced in court, but those who ordered it were never held accountable. 15 years after the murder of Anna Politkovskaya, pressure on independent journalists here in Russia has been rising. In recent months, media outlets and journalists critical of the Kremlin have faced police searches and criminal cases, and many have been declared foreign agents. The foreign agent label shows that the Russian government sees journalists as enemies, Yelena Kostyuchenko feels. The reporter says she regularly receives threats for her work. But to her, Anna Politkovskaya's example shows that journalists must carry on, even in the face of intimidation. People who kill journalists or think about it cannot be allowed to be given the illusion that their actions will stop a certain topic being covered, that it could get them off the hook. it won't. When a journalist is killed, that person's colleagues must step up and take their place. Anna Politkovskaya's office will remain empty, but her fearlessness continues to inspire those who refuse to be silent.
Inspiring those that refuse to be silent, indeed, and that's obviously what this award today was trying to say. But the award is about more than just one newspaper, Emily. It's also about freedom of press in Russia as a whole, which has come under severe threat in recent years. Tell us more.
Well, I would say that Novaya Gazeta is becoming, a real rarity now on the media landscape in Russia. There has been increasing pressure on independent journalists, over the last few years. But I would say this last year in particular, the pressure has really been upped. We've seen a whole list of media outlets that are critical of the Kremlin being declared to be so-called foreign agents, which means that they face, not only the stigma that comes with that label, but also a huge administrative burden, which can, mean problems with financing and so on. Some media outlets have even had to close, and also individual journalists have been declared foreign agents as well. Some of the people that I spoke to about that have told me that it really makes them feel like they are enemies in their own country. And even in recent months, there's been a hashtag that's been trending, which is "journalism is not a crime." Several independent journalists have had to leave the country. There have been criminal cases against them, police searches, and so on. So I think this is a really important signal right now for journalists here in Russia to keep doing what they are doing, from the international community.
Indeed, an important signal. All right, Emily, thank you very much. DW's Emily Sherwin in Moscow.
Let me just point out that I was so fascinated with the report on Anna Politkovskaya, which really reflects exactly the importance of this newspaper, which a couple of weeks ago was one of the last news sources to be shut down by Putin, and it has been. They were referring to the Ukraine war. They were referring to the earlier wars as well, not to the present one. This is a piece put together by Radio Free Europe, a profile, and it's relatively short and captures slightly different aspects of Dmitry Muratov.
Во всех регионах у нас десятки фрилансеров людей по всей стране. Мы газета нашей страны. Знаешь, надо это вот как решит уже болотное. Из тех, кто совершает репрессивные маневры в отношении российской журналистики, думают, что у них есть мощный союзник, это силовые структуры и власть. Раз 15 лет не могут раскрыть, значит, наверное, знают, но не хотят сказать, да?
So that is interesting that Gorbachev, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, contributed to his Nobel Prize to the funding of this newspaper. Interesting connection that nobody else had mentioned. Now, this is a summary of contributions of the newspaper. It's on Democracy Now!, which Amy Goodman, and it was carried by WGOT in town on radio, but this is the television, brief television summary of a good friend or well, you'll see.
Two journalists were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize Friday, or the announcement of the award, in recognition for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression and as symbolic of journalists globally fighting to protect press freedom. On Friday, we reported on Maria Ressa, the Filipina investigative journalist, executive editor, and founder of the news site Rappler. Today, we look at her Nobel Peace Prize co-winner, Dmitry Muratov, the editor-in-chief of the Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, which has lost more journalists to murder than any other Russian news outlet. 6 of its staff members have been killed since 1993. For more, we're joined by Katrina vanden Heuvel, editorial director and publisher of The Nation magazine, columnist for The Washington Post. She's been reporting on Russia for more than 30 years. Her latest piece in The Nation, a courageous voice for press freedom and independence in Russia. Katrina, welcome back to Democracy Now! And condolences on the death of your father. I wanted to start by talking about this work you've been doing for so many decades, and the winner of one of the 2 winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, Dmitry Muratov.
So I and my late husband, Stephen Cohen, met Dmitry in the cafeteria, the basement cafeteria of a then bold Glasnost newspaper, Moscow News. He was there with a few colleagues. They wanted to launch an independent, muckraking newspaper, and they had 2 desks, 2 computers, and just about that, and they launched. And it is a testament to the ability to survive if you're a bold, creative editor, which I knew he was. What I didn't understand was how he would become an advocate for freedom of the press against all odds. As you mentioned, Amy, 6 of his journalists have been killed in the line of duty. One of them, Anna Politkovskaya, was murdered in October 2006, ironically, sadly, just a day before Dima Muratov received the Nobel Prize in 2006, October 7. What he's become is the possibility of doing investigative journalism in Russia today is very dangerous. It's not just his journalists, there are others who have been killed. Yeltsin era, Putin era, and there's a culture of impunity, of failure to hold account those who are killing freedom of the press. On the other hand, Novaya has done some of the best independent, muckraking investigative journalism about abuse of power. They in fact covered Putin's abuses of corruption, the public officials' corruption, even before Navalny circulated his videos. Right-wing extremism, one of their young journalists, Yelena Malashina, covered the persecution of the LGBT community in Chechnya. So it's a dangerous, very dangerous profession. But Novaya has not only persevered, endured, but has younger journalists wanting to work for it. It has numbers that all of us would envy, about 30 million in social media each month, and 8 to 11 million readers come to its website. Print edition is smaller, but a younger generation is coming to it. So it survives. And I think this prize will both give it protection, but ironically will raise the question of foreign funds. We can talk about that, but there has been a trend of repressive media legislation. For example, if you take foreign money, being labeled foreign agent. So that will be interesting to see what happens, but I suspect this prize for the most part will give Novaya more protection
And that
so that-
point is something Dmitry Muratov raised. Also, your response to those who suggested Alexei Navalny should have been awarded the prize and that Muratov was really a compromise by the Nobel Committee so as not to offend the Kremlin. He himself said Alexei Navalny should have gotten it.
So Alexei Navalny, I think, is, he's an anti-corruption activist. He's also a political figure. I mean, he received 32% in the Moscow mayoral elections a few years ago. Novaya has covered the persecution of Alexei Navalny, very comprehensive coverage. But I do think Navalny is not, he's an internet anti-corruption activist. And he also got very involved in the electoral scene in a way that Novaya steps back and reports, has its positions, obviously, but is honest about them. So I think there should be a calling out of the repression of the Putin administration vis-a-vis journalists, but not attacking Novaya. Novaya has attacked foreign agent labeling, has stood for Navalny's rights to expose corruption. So I think that is misinformed. And in fact, I think it's an attempt to divide those who stand for, press freedom. Navalny, Muratov. I will say Muratov is an extraordinary. He has retained a sense of humanity and humor.
We're going to have to leave it there. Katrina vanden Heuvel, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now! Two journalists.
So there's never enough time, but I thought that added some dimensions as well. Now I'd like to go to a couple of very relatively short interviews with Maria Ressa. The first one was the day of the award that Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour on PBS had with her. And I think that is illuminating as well. So move on.
The Nobel Peace Prizes were awarded today in Oslo, Norway. This year's winners were two journalists honored for their unrelenting pursuits of truth in a world becoming less free. Dmitry Muratov, editor of one of Russia's last independent news sources, was recognized for his work. And Philippines journalist Maria Ressa, editor of Rappler.com, called for a reform of social media platforms.
Our greatest need today is to transform that hate and violence, the toxic sludge that's coursing through our information ecosystem, prioritized by American internet companies that make more money by spreading that hate and triggering the worst in us.
I spoke with Maria Ressa last night, and I asked her if it felt at all real yet.
I'm still doing, that painting, the scream, it's been more than a month and not yet. It's sinking in slowly, but having to write a Nobel lecture makes you really think about this.
What does it mean to you personally, first of all?
Judy, you know that we've been under attack by our government for the last 5 years, and having the Nobel Committee shine the light on what journalists are going through in the Philippines. I mean, personally, it's a lift. It feels like a little bit of a reprieve, and hopefully I can pay it forward. I think journalists in the Philippines felt this, and Filipinos, as we move into our May 2022 elections.
What do you think this is going to mean for the people of the Philippines, but for government officials, because they've hauled you into court time and again, they've charged you with libel. You had to get, permission from 4 different courts, even to travel to Oslo.
Look, I think the conditions haven't changed yet. Just yesterday, a former colleague was shot, hit with a bullet to the head. But also beyond that, a cabinet secretary just said he would file a legal complaint against 7 news organizations. And all we did was report on the corruption charges against him that was said in a press conference.
And there's an election coming up in the Philippines. Do you think that provides hope of change from the current Duterte regime?
It feels like 1986 all over again because it is a Marcos against a woman. You know, our top opposition leader is the vice president, Leni Robredo, and Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is the front runner for president. And he filed his candidacy 35 years after his family and his father were kicked out, ousted in a people power revolt. So who knows what will happen in our May elections? One thing is clear is that you cannot have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts. And that is something all of us, all democracies around the world face.
What more, Maria, do you think needs to be done to support journalists, to support freedom of the press, especially as we see more and more governments around the world sliding toward authoritarianism?
I think the accelerant for the attacks against journalists is technology. And part of the reason that these authoritarian populist style leaders have gained power all around the world has been because the information ecosystem, the gatekeepers have changed from news organizations to technology, to social media platforms. So I think the first step is regulation. We have to stop the impunity that social media actually prioritizes over news, over facts. And then the second thing is we have to help independent media survive. The world has gotten significantly more dangerous, I'd say exponentially more dangerous for journalists just trying to do their jobs.
I was looking at the Committee to Protect Journalists. They've put out in their last report, 1,421 journalists from around the world killed since 1992, 293 imprisoned for their work. But you keep urging journalists to stay with it. What's at stake here?
Truth, facts, our democracy, right? I always say that what's wound up happening is technology. Social media has prioritized the spread of lies laced with anger and hate over facts. So if you don't have facts, you can't have truth. If you don't have truth, you can't have trust.
When ordinary citizens ask, why should this matter for me? What do you say to them?
Well, if you're on social media, if you're in the American social media platforms, you are being insidiously manipulated. You have these algorithms of distribution, algorithms of bias. The editorial judgment of these tech platforms are actually done exponentially. And it's the prioritization is lies over facts.
So when this prize is awarded to you and you go back home to the Philippines, what do you think the prospects are that you're going to be able to remain free?
I don't know. You know, the future for me is, I don't know what it will bring. I do know that I face 10 criminal charges, which could lead to about 100 years in prison. And it's almost like a high stakes game of chicken because I know I am innocent. I know these are trumped up charges and I will fight them in court. My ability to do that will depend on what happens during our elections, whether our judges stay to the spirit of the law. But I also think it's a time that matters. I think it's a risk worth taking. I couldn't do anything else.
Maria Ressa, being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, we congratulate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Nobel.
So one more brief interview. This is a little different. Done a couple of days before the actual awards were given by a journalist with a Canadian broadcasting company, and adds another facet to this winner, this laureate. Okay.
I guess first thing I want to say, obviously, congratulations. And I can't imagine what it feels like for you to have landed there.
It's exhilarating. I'm more emotional than I normally am, but I think part of it is that when you feel like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, it's okay when you keep rolling the rock up the hill, but when someone actually lifts the burden and helps you push, you can relax a little bit, then you begin to see, I'm getting emotional. Then you begin to realize what you've gone through. It's been 5 tough years. You know that. You came to the Philippines and saw what we've gone through. I hope that this is, I hope this will be a call to action.
Maria Ressa almost didn't get on that plane to Oslo. It wasn't until a day or so before the flight that the courts granted her permission to go. She's out on bail after a conviction. Journalism is not a crime, but when her online media site Rappler started asking questions, exposing wrongdoing, calling out disinformation from the government, Ressa was deemed a criminal in the Philippines, charged with cyber libel for an article she did not write, published before the law first came into effect. Charge after charge keeps landing. Another libel complaint filed even as she was boarding the plane. What is it that is happening that is getting under their skin so much?
Rappler wasn't the first news organization attacked by President Duterte. We were the third. The first was the largest newspaper, then the largest television station. We're the largest online news group. This is my 35th year as a journalist. I know the whys, why we do what we do. I helped write the standards and ethics manuals of 4 news organizations. And so, you know, I know where the line is, and I feel like the government's trying to bulldoze us to step back so that they gain more power. And they do it through the information ecosystem and the law, the weaponization of the law. So why are we under attack? Another journalist was killed in the Philippines, someone I knew. So that brings the death toll to at least 22 people under the Duterte administration. And the lawyers who defend us in court, more of them have been killed. You know, that's at least 63.
She is relentless in expressing the need for press freedom and the need for journalists to defend it. Was having that very conversation on a panel in the fall when her phone rang. You can see her taking the call here, wisely muting herself, because on the other end was the Nobel Committee.
You are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021.
Oh my gosh, this is I'm speechless.
Keeping it private for the rest of the panel until word was released. It was a lovely moment, but can a Nobel Peace Prize change anything?
I can already tell you it has. It was a lift, not just for journalists in the Philippines, but for so many journalists all around the world. My friends in Venezuela, Luz Meli Reyes, you know, friends in Indonesia, in Hong Kong, in Myanmar. So journalists felt the lift, but then beyond that, in the Philippines, all of a sudden, journalists who were quieter became not so quiet. It gave voice to so many who were quiet. And that's amazing. And I hope that globally, they help the citizens in our democracies understand why what we do is important and that they need to jump in and help democracy stay alive.
So there will be people watching this from the privileged position of Canada, potentially seeing this as a problem of another place. What are they missing?
It's your problem as well. You know, I've said since 2016, our dystopian present is your future. Look, the journalism and technology, the old and the new gatekeepers impact everyone, every citizen in a democracy. And whether you know it or not, if you're on social media, it has become a behavior modification system. And you are Pavlov's dogs. We have become Pavlov's dogs. So trying to deal with that insidious manipulation, to try to get to the facts, that's your problem. I hope this will be a call to action. That's what I hope to do. You know, we can either go further into the descent into tyranny or collectively act like the world did post-World War II and change the world.
Thank you so much for making time. I know you didn't have it. We'll all be watching you on Friday.
Thank you. Thanks. It's good to see you again.
I thought that was sort of neat. We discovered, I first played you the call from Oslo to her. And in this thing, we actually saw her answer that call. When I discovered this online, I said, gee, that's absolutely amazing. I have about 10 more minutes and then I'll be done. I hope you can hang with me. I wanted, both the laureates gave 20-minute talks called the Nobel Lectures. And I wanted to play just the first 6 minutes of Dmitry Muratov, because I think it's both interesting and somewhat amusing. And 4 minutes of Ressa, of Maria Ressa's, and then I will be finished. So here we go, 6 minutes of Muratov, who actually speaks, unfortunately, in Russian, but that's his language, and I think you'll be able to read the subtitles.
Now I call upon Dmitry Muratov to come forward and give his Nobel lecture for 2021. Please take the floor.
Человека, мир, прогресс, права человека. Эти три цели неразрывно связаны. Это из Нобелевской речи академика Андрея Сахарова, гражданина Земли, великого мыслителя. Эту речь прямо здесь, в этом городе, в четверг, 11 декабря 1975 года, прочитала его жена Елена Боннер. Риторику на государственных телевизионных каналах. Но я видел и другие телевизоры, которые показывали честные и страшные картины. Во время Чеченской войны на одном из вокзалов стояли на рельсах, снова продвигают идеи смерти за Родину. Они же...
Now I call upon.
So that would be, it's so apropos to the present situation and very sobering. And of course, that culture of war has taken over Russia. But and then I'd like to see the first 4 minutes of Maria Ressa's presentation to the and then afterwards I'll tell you how you can watch their whole talks.
Thank you. Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you, a representative of every journalist around the world who is forced to sacrifice so much to hold the line, to stay true to our values and mission, to bring you the truth and hold power to account. I remember the brutal dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, my friend Luz Meli Reyes in Venezuela, Roman Protasevich in Belarus, whose plane was literally hijacked so he could be arrested, Jimmy Lai languishing in a Hong Kong prison, Sunny Shui, who after getting out of more than 7 years in jail, started another news group and now is forced to flee Myanmar. And in my own country, 23-year-old Frenchie May Cumpio, still in prison after nearly 2 years, and just 36 hours ago, the news that my former colleague, Jess Malabanan, was killed with a bullet to his head. There are so many to thank for keeping us safer and working. The Hold the Line coalition of more than 80 global groups defending press freedom and the human rights groups that help us.
I call upon Maria Ressa to deliver her Nobel lecture for 2021. Please take the stage.
I have messed up here. Hold on.
For you as well, at least 63 lawyers, more lawyers have been killed than journalists in the Philippines. At least 63 compared to the 22 journalists murdered after President Rodrigo Duterte took office in 2016. Since then, Karapatan, a member of our Courage on Human Rights Coalition, has had 16 people killed, and Senator Laila de Lima, because she demanded accountability, is serving her 5th year in jail. Or ABS-CBN, our largest broadcaster, a newsroom that I once led, which last year lost its franchise to operate. I helped create a startup, Rappler, turning 10 years old in January. We're getting old. Our attempt to put together two sides of the same coin that shows everything wrong with our world today: the absence of law and democratic vision for the 21st century. That coin represents our information ecosystem, which determines everything else about our world. Journalists, that's one side, the old gatekeepers. The other is technology with its godlike power, the new gatekeepers. It has allowed the virus of lies to infect each of us, pitting us against each other, bringing out our fears, anger, hate, and setting the stage for the rise of authoritarians and dictators around the world.
Well, that is the segments of it. There's a lot of information. You can listen to their complete lectures at nobelprize.org right here. And on my birthday in 2015, I visited the Nobel Museum in Stockholm. And there's a picture that I took. So I didn't have to steal this picture from elsewhere. So with that, I want to thank you for coming. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I think it gives you a real picture of these two laureates. I like to listen to the Russian. It sounds so nice to my ear, and I hope you could have read. I think you can read the subtitles. Yeah, the film. Yeah.
Check your chat, Jon. Okay.
I did in the middle of that film, and that's what led to the mix-up there. So I will check my chat right now. It's a note from you and from some others. Let's see. I feel, yeah. This is as usual. The Nobel Prize is a message from the Norwegians. And in the process of exploring this, I've discovered some fascinating things about Norway, that they have bought the rights to forests in Guyana as a way of offsetting their carbon footprint. Norway is a remarkable country, a great country to travel in. They speak English better than we do, I've discovered. And I urge you to go to Norway. Sweden is nice too, but Norway has a special place in my heart. Anyway, I just read it, and thank you for your note, Shirley. And
very important in today's world. They pointed out she really identified social media as being a source of treating us like Pavlov's dogs.
Yep, she said this also in Judy Woodruff's interview as well. I think that's one of the major messages to come out of this. And she says the solution is some form of regulation. So I think that's something we should be more aware of. The idea of regulation has come up again because Elon Musk is threatening to buy Twitter to keep it out of the hands of the managers of Twitter, who self-regulate to a certain extent. Ultimately, I think it's going to require at least some responsible government regulation. Notice that it's well regulated in Russia. They just block what they don't like. So it's two-edged sword there. That's worth talking about. Anyway, thank you for coming. Any other questions or comments?
John X has a question. John?
John, yeah.
Jon, I just want to thank you. You've been doing this probably for 10 years, and I've helped you a few times. And I know how interesting it is to go around and find 6 speakers to talk about the Nobel Prizes, and how rewarding it is when we get good talks. But you've taken this a step further, because when you don't get a good talk, somebody talk for you, you talk yourself, and often give a better presentation than we would have gotten by someone that we had invited. So thank you very much for all of this for many years.
You're very welcome. And maybe we'll just have you give the physics talk. That would solve the problem.
You do remember I gave one of the physics Nobel Prize talks one year.
Great job there. Very good. Thank you, John. Anyway, have a good day. And Julianne mentioned that next Monday, there's kind of a summary from Diane Boxer. Is that her name? Yeah, I always.
Yeah, Diana Boxer. It's part of the spring potpourri, but it's at 1:30. So don't be misled that it's a Nobel Prize, but join us anyway. But
Okay.
John, I know that Ken Birds would be thanking you again, and we truly appreciate all your time.
No, this was a lot of fun, actually. Just searching. And when I discovered that we got a video of her actually receiving the notification from Oslo in that interview on Canadian Broadcasting Company interview, I thought that was a great catch. I mean, so we're all wired together in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay well. We'll see you again.